Welcome to today's Explainer. When we hear the name Moses, we usually picture this towering, epic deliverer, right? Staff in hand, literally defying an empire. But today, we're zooming way in on the hidden beginnings of this legendary figure. Because every legend has a start, and Moses' story, well, it begins in the most unlikely, vulnerable place you could possibly imagine. So think about this. What if the greatest leader began as a hunted child? It's kind of staggering when you really stop and think about it. Before his name echoed through millennia, he was just completely helpless. A tiny baby, actively targeted for death by the most powerful enemy on Earth, before his destiny even had a chance to get off the ground.
Okay, let's dive into this. At the very start of our story, the man who would literally change history hadn't done any of the massive things we know him for. He hadn't parted the Red Sea. No way. He hadn't stood toe-to-toe with Pharaoh, and he certainly hadn't shaken the mighty Egyptian empire with miracles yet. It's a completely blank slate. To truly understand the deliverer he becomes, we really need to understand the dark, oppressive world he was born into.
Which brings us to Section 1, the oppression in Egypt, a nation in chains. So, let's set the scene. Hundreds of years have actually passed since Joseph heroically saved Egypt from that devastating famine. Back then, there was peace, right? The Israelites thrived, they multiplied. But empires change. The past gets forgotten pretty fast. A new pharaoh rises to power, and he couldn't care less about Joseph's memory. Instead, he looks at the massive number of Israelites, and he's paralyzed by fear. That intense paranoia quickly turns into outright cruelty. He systematically enslaves them, forcing them into this brutal, back-breaking labor, literally building enormous cities under the blazing Egyptian sun. They cried out constantly, but it really seemed like absolutely no one was listening. Moving on to Section 2, the river rescue and a mother's desperate choice. Driven by this wild paranoia, Pharaoh actually issues a horrific decree. Every single Hebrew baby boy must be killed. Just try to imagine the sheer agonizing terror that struck into every Hebrew home. It's unimaginable. For 3 agonizing months, a mother from the tribe of Levi manages to hide her newborn son in absolute secret. Can you imagine? Every knock at the door, every sound outside must have been terrifying. But eventually, she can't hide him anymore. So she makes a desperate, heartbreaking choice. She takes a basket, carefully coats it with tar and pitch to make it waterproof, places her precious child inside, and sets him among the reeds of the Nile River. She is literally surrendering him into God's hands. And then the basket is found. And guys, this is a mind-blowing turn of hidden providence. Of all people, it is Pharaoh's own daughter who comes down to bathe and spots the crying baby. Feeling this sudden, massive rush of compassion, she actually chooses mercy over her own father's brutal command. And get this, here's the incredible irony. Thanks to the baby's brave sister, Miriam, who was watching and steps out from the reeds to offer help, Moses' own mother is hired to nurse him. Just think about that for a second. God brilliantly turned the enemy's palace into an impenetrable fortress of protection, paying Moses' own mother to raise her baby. He is given the name Moses, which appropriately means drawn out of the water. Next up, Section 3, 2 worlds, and the prince's identity crisis. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Moses grows up straddling 2 intensely conflicting realities. Have you ever felt caught between 2 completely different worlds? Well, Moses is living it on an extreme scale. On one hand, he's an Egyptian prince. He's got unrestricted access to immense wealth, the very best education in the ancient world, and he rubs shoulders with royalty every single day. But on the flip side, his Hebrew reality is just gnawing at him. He knows he's different. He knows his blood ties him to the suffering slaves who are laboring and dying right outside those lavish palace walls. He possesses the elite, powerful education of Egypt, but deep down, he has the beating, burdened heart of a deliverer. That leads us right into Section 4, the breaking point, a fatal mistake. That immense internal pressure just had to boil over eventually, right? One day, Moses goes out and sees an Egyptian brutally beating Hebrew slave. And in a sudden, intense fit of rage, he strikes the Egyptian down and hides his body in the sand. But the secret doesn't last. The very next day, a fellow Hebrew actually rebukes him for it, which makes it totally clear that the crime is widely known. Word immediately reaches the palace, Pharaoh targets him for death, and Moses has no choice but to run. Literally overnight, he plummets from a powerful prince with the whole world at his fingertips to a hunted fugitive fleeing for his life into the desolate wilderness. From Egypt's palace to desert silence, the sheer dramatic shift in his environment here is staggering. This is a guy raised in absolute luxury. And now? Now he's wandering completely alone, exhausted, in the strange land of Midian. He lost absolutely everything. Like a lot of us when we hit absolute rock bottom, he probably thought his story and his life's ultimate purpose were just entirely over. But as we'll see in Section 5, the wilderness training, he was actually preparing to be a leader.
So the crucial point is that God wasn't wasting those silent years. Even in exile, Moses' true character shines right through. Sitting by a well, he steps in to defend the daughters of a man named Jethro from a group of really cruel shepherds. That deliverer's heart, it's still completely intact. He eventually marries one of those daughters, becomes a humble shepherd himself, and enters a deeply important period of hidden preparation. You see, the wilderness wasn't a punishment for him. It was a crucible. To eventually lead an entire nation out of the most powerful empire on earth, he first had to learn humility, patience, and absolute dependence on God, all in the total quiet of the desert.
Let's look at Section 6 now, a groaning nation and a listening God. Back in Egypt, while Moses was being forged in the quiet of the desert, decades simply passed by. The Israelites continued to suffer this agonizing pain. They prayed, they cried out, and honestly, they probably felt utterly abandoned by the God of their ancestors. But then, the historical account gives us one of its most powerful lines. God heard their groaning. Heaven was actively preparing a rescue behind the scenes. You know, sometimes it feels like we are completely forgotten in our own waiting periods, but the truth is, God's timing is simply never late. The pieces were moving perfectly into place. And all those pieces come together in Section 7, the encounter, a fire in the desert. Okay, picture this in your mind. It's just a totally ordinary day near Mount Horeb. Moses is doing what he's been doing for 40 years now, tending sheep. Nothing special. Until, suddenly, the ordinary just shatters. He sees this strange, captivating sight. A bush is on fire, but it's not turning to ash. It isn't burning up. Intrigued, Moses steps a bit closer. And then, right from the midst of those flames, a voice calls out his very name. Moses, Moses. In that exact, unforgettable instant, the shepherd of Midian encounters the living God. I really want you to take away this core theme from our explainer today. Sometimes your wilderness isn't punishment, it's preparation. God was actively working in those hidden, broken places all along. I mean, Moses genuinely thought his life of significance ended in failure back in the sands of Egypt. But the truth? God was literally just getting started with him. And that leaves us with a massive question to chew on. How is this humble shepherd of Midian going to return and shake the very foundations of Egypt? What actually happens when a man prepared in the quiet of the wilderness confronts the most powerful empire on the face of the earth? Well, that explosive conflict is exactly what we're going to unpack next time. You absolutely won't want to miss it.